Greetings. This is Timothy. I am still here. I am a person who shares and sells my own words, and as a listener, you have the free will to discern and choose what words are useful and relevant to your own life, and to leave the rest behind. In these videos, we talk about the nature of the time. So we're discussing a new moon in the sign of Scorpio later today. Mercury is slowing to a station at 27 degrees of Scorpio at the end of this month. Tomorrow, Uranus reaches his closest point to the Earth. And by the way, if you're interested in these technical details, the aspects, the degrees, the signs, I encourage you to go to a machine such as planetwatcher.com, where you can certainly get those articulate details. My own goals and intentions for these videos is rather to do translation, and I do this translation through my own words as well as my own energy and expression. So today we're going to be having some real talk. A lot is conglomerating in the sign of Scorpio, the sign of reality. And what's very interesting about Scorpio as a sign is that Scorpio is a water sign, okay? And water has to do with feelings and emotions. And simultaneously, Scorpio doesn't always seem to care about how we feel in that most comfortable type of way. And that is because Scorpio is the full spectrum of emotional experience. Scorpio is the full spectrum of life experiences. And when we look at the full spectrum of life, certainly there is a huge diversity of creatures inhabiting this planet of many different sizes and shapes and shades. Okay, so Scorpio is this emotional full spectrum where we meet our limits and we see the bottom of the barrel, and through confronting and experiencing these full spectrum of life, Scorpio is the sign that most catalyzes change, transformation, and even a cathartic releasing of emotion can be a symptom that change and transformation is already well underway. Now, uniquely, this new moon in Scorpio taking place in just a few hours later on this evening is opposite to Uranus. So the sun being opposite to Uranus tomorrow is this indication that Uranus is at its time in the year where it's closest to the Earth. And so we also have this highly restless, revolutionary, Uranian energy. And Uranus has to do with objectivity, awareness, the higher perspective that allows us to see life as though it were a chemical reaction from that very lofty, higher perspective, again, very objective. When we think about life as a chemical reaction or as a mathematical equation, A plus B equals C, that is this very objective perspective. And interestingly, this Uranus being opposite to the new moon in Scorpio is bringing in a dynamic between Scorpio subjectivity, these emotions, this intensity that can be taking place deeply within ourselves. And we are noticing our triggers, we're noticing our reactions, and we're following those trails of breadcrumbs inside to those hidden dynamics, those unconscious motives that may be at the roots of these subjective triggers and subjective emotional experience. And simultaneously, that Uranus is bringing in an objective perspective where we can really view and see our own inner underworld. And that's what this Scorpio dynamic is. It's our inner emotional experience that is revealing our own underworld. That is to say, our own unconscious dynamics. And the unconscious, which is really the majority of our human psyche, is a real dynamic to pay attention to, because even though we're not fully conscious of all of these things going on, for example, in our bodies, in our psyche, these have a huge effect on our life, on our experience of life, and what we're basing our decisions and choices around. And so I like to think of our body as being an excellent key to the unconscious, because what our own unconscious field is simply all of the life going on inside of us, even those processes that are automatic, effortless, being run by unconscious systems, unconscious parts of ourself, and yet they are still a part of our psychological makeup. Okay, so this new moon in Scorpio opposite to Uranus is a really interesting dynamic, because we can be bringing this objectivity, this higher vantage point into viewing this deep, hidden, mysterious inner world, and likely we can be experiencing a type of reverberation between this intense emotional underworld, the triggers and the reactions that are informing us of our own unconscious dynamics, and reverberating between those reactions or emotions or subjective experience and our own objective, again, that scientific or mathematical mind that's almost interested, curious, excited, in that way that is almost viewing these scientific experiments. And so it's like, wow, look at that chemical reaction. Look how we brought in these ingredients, and this is what has unfolded. And we can really be learning from this viewing, from this objectivity, and allowing these catalysts and even reactions to be informing us from the inside out. Because again, this is what really allows for metamorphosis, evolution, positive transformation, and constructive change. All of these potentials are found within the archetype of Scorpio, where our current collective human consciousness is very much focused. Scorpio is looking beneath the surface. So Mercury stationing retrograde these days is really bringing our minds, our analytical awareness, what we are communicating, speaking, and exchanging with others, is getting into real talk, is getting into what's deeper, what really matters, and how we really think and feel. So Mercury retrograde is like the soul detective that is exploring our own and others' deeper unconscious dynamics. Scorpio also very much looks at power issues, power dynamics, as well as unconscious fears, unconscious phobias, and is not what we are afraid of, typically motivated and even fed by our own sweeping under or running away or desire to avoid particular areas or dynamics in ourself. So Scorpio really has to do with this attraction and repulsion dynamic that is oftentimes motivated by these deeply hidden themes: power dynamics, sexual dynamics, unconscious fears, phobias, attractions, and repulsions. So Scorpio, how we really are, how we really feel, what we're really afraid of, what we're really driven and motivated by. I'll quickly share, I saw this recent, astrological memes get circulated about how You know, we would all love to get to Sagittarius, and now Mercury's stationing retrograde and about to move backwards before we get to Sagittarius. And all I have to say in my reaction to this is, well, good. Because Sagittarius is this over-exaggerated, you know, everything's good, truth and oneness that tends to be over-exaggerated by the bypassing of what's really going on in its full complexity. We would love to skip beyond Scorpio into Sagittarius. And that's a sort of simple reflection of the new age stereotype, which is something I do address in these videos, such as my addressal and my concern towards positivity culture. This idea that we should always be happy, always be positive, always seeing the half glass full, which paradoxically is usually driven by unconscious fears and unconscious insecurities. So we're really trying to hold it all together and be happy and perfect, and you know, it's all good. And what's really going on beneath the surface may be speaking of an entirely different perspective or dynamic. So with this new moon and Mercury retrograde taking place in the Scorpio at this time, we really get to explore the shadow. Okay, our own shadow, other people's shadow, that wild and inconceivable depth. Okay. This is the power aspect of ourself and others. And this is where we get uncomfortable because it's where life becomes complicated. I'll give a quick example of this. The word manipulation is one of those words that usually is associated with a type of negativity. Who wants to be considered a manipulator? And yet, manipulation is how life works. We do not eat or move about our day or interact with others without manipulating our body, our mouth, our words. Life is manipulation. Life is power dynamics. So absolutely, spirituality is actually about forming a relationship with the shadow. Okay. Real spirituality is about exploring and understanding our own unconscious, so to come into the reality of who we are, what our life is about. And honestly, this is the foundation of evolutionary astrology, which is a very Pluto-centric branch of astrology, which is why evolutionary astrology also happens to be a particularly powerful, useful, and transformative branch of astrology, because it goes straight to the bottom of the barrel themes and experiences, and not just what, but why we have these experiences throughout our life. So exploring the unconscious, exploring the shadow really pays off. I would even say that this is what authentic spirituality is all about. Okay, that bypassing Scorpio, shortcutting to goodness, positivity, is where we actually suppress or repress our own nature. And this will inevitably lead to explosions or breakdowns. And in a certain respect, we all do this unconsciously as a coping mechanism for dealing with other people, society, or our complex relationships. Therefore, when we have explosions or breakdowns, they can rather be informing us of what we may have previously suppressed or repressed, and that can be some rather useful information. Now, there's something to be said about positivity, about maintaining a healthy level of optimism, of goodness, which is being relaxed, okay, feeling safe in our bodies so we can have a healthy nervous system and a healthy body. It's been proven that an abusive relationship, for example, is more unhealthy than smoking, right? So having a calm body, a calm nervous system, maintaining a level of peace, contentment, positivity is a way to have a healthy body, nervous system, and relationships. But you know what is not an authentically relaxed or happy body is when we repress or suppress what is authentically going on inside ourselves, or sweeping those things under the rug, which again will inevitably lead to those breakdowns or those explosions. Okay, so oftentimes we're confronting those limits when we're doing our shadow work, where we assume that something's one way or it's all this way, and appearances can be misleading. That is almost the motto for Scorpio itself. And you know, in the sign of Scorpio, we learn that although something or someone may appear more rough or intense or negative on the surface, does not mean that that is something detrimental in our lives. And similarly, there are many wolves in sheep clothing out there in the world. This type of real discernment of what's going on beneath the surface takes place through the sign, the archetype of Scorpio. Okay, so what we say or what we believe is one thing, while we may be living an entirely different reality. Okay, so we don't get to the gurus and gumdrops of Sagittarius without doing the proper shadow work. And again, this is sometimes challenged by the positivity culture, which is really a bypass culture that is very popular in our American dream, Western society, as well as many of the misleading New Age or spiritual teachings that are still all pervasive and popular in our current time. Okay, new moon opposite to Uranus, sun opposite to Uranus tomorrow can be bringing these groundbreaking revelations that are deeper, that are more complex, that are honoring and acknowledging more of the picture, that this multi-dimensional construct we're looking at is more complex, more faceted, and there are more ways to look at this thing. There are blind spots that we're becoming made aware of at this time. There's also a tremendous restless quality between that Uranus and Scorpio, where we can really be sick of what has been feeling like stagnation or these limitations, these old feelings, these old experiences that we've so redundantly had can really be challenging us, waking us up, inviting this deeper soul investigation, the soul detective of Mercury retrograde. Why do I really have these redundant experiences? Why do I really have these redundant emotions? And here we are taking responsibility. We are accountable for many of our feelings and emotions throughout life, but we can't simply assume that black and white societal or new age blanket, oh, it's all us, or it's all them, or it's all this, or it's all that. There is more to the picture that's being introduced to us at this time. And I gotta say, continuing the end of October through the beginning of November, we can really be reaching these limits, coming up to these obstacles, finding ourselves at these dead ends. A lot of the stereotypical astrologers will be correlating this to Mercury retrograde. And actually, this will largely be coming from Mars in a third quarter square to Saturn and Pluto. This is actually a really beautiful Mercury retrograde that can be taking us into what really matters. All right. Uranus and Mars are both in signs ruled by Venus right now. We're really exploring what really matters to us, aka what we really value. This is a beautiful Mercury retrograde, beginning its station retrograde conjoined Venus and asteroid Pallas Athena. Incredibly penetrative, incredibly insightful. There's a huge depth to really explore the mystery of love, the mystery of our hearts, the mystery of what we value, the complexity of life, the complexity of the human psyche, and there being this heart-wrenching beauty in the full spectrum of life, the experience of light and darkness, the experience of good and evil, is what evokes this catharsis and transformation of the heart to initiate the human psyche into the deepest bottom of the barrel understanding of what it means to be alive, what it means to be a spiritual soul, so on and so forth. Mercury is going to station direct mid-November in a trine to the moon's north node in Cancer, trine to Neptune. There is really this way to step into this collective understanding, the human experience, the collective human psyche at this point in time, where human history has landed us, the emotional consequences and the emotional runoff that results from this. And this can be catalyzing so much emotional exploration that's inviting inner transformation. Active emotional processing is the key this year with the moon's north node in Cancer. I've been very redundant about this point. Even though it may not seem like we're paying it forward, we may be overwhelmed with emotion. We may even be going through a healthy temporary experience of depression, which is more of a rebooting and a reprioritization, so to align ourselves with what really matters most to us. And there is a societal deconditioning, Saturn-Pluto conjunction, that is very involved in order to find what really matters, not only most to us, but what really matters most in life, period, which requires a social deconditioning, societal expectation deconditioning, what it is that our bosses, our work, what our parents, authorities, or ex-teachers taught us is really being challenged to be defied, to be transformed, and to be evolved into something more meaningful and more respectful. That's the key. That's why this inner emotional reboot is necessary, to discern what is respectfully ours versus theirs. What we value in our hearts that matters to us, that fills us up and gives us meaning, versus the distractions, the interferences, the expectations that gets in the way. Okay, and this is all taking us back to childhood, all taking us back to our families. And here we have not only this new moon time, but this new moon opens the next month where we can break the rules. New moon in Scorpio opposite to Uranus, our defiance and this rebellious quality that you will experience and witness in the world this next month, if harnessed productively, if we can be honest about our own shadows before we go off on crusades and blame games, putting it on everybody else because we're so good and we're so perfect. It's not that there aren't real victims out there as well. Maybe we were a victim of real abuse. And that is to honor our actual emotions, to respect and protect ourselves. So, it's not an easy, simple, one-size-fits-all time. We have to honor the complexity of our story, what we've experienced from childhood up until now, how that's been shaping us to be the unique person that we are, and what we need to honor our deeper hearts, our deeper values. There is a creative tension here with that Mercury stationed retrograde with Venus and Pallas in a sesquiquadrate aspect to the moon's north node in Cancer. This can bring up a creative tension of finding and forming these connections, these relationships that are on a similar level to ourselves, so we can actually share our vision, our dreams, our truth with those who are able to meet us on a similar level. Okay, I'll be honest, this time period can be bringing up more of, yeah, I'm not totally there, and this may not be the perfect group or relationship. And how can we honor our values, our vision, and work with the groups that we're already involved in, work in the relationships that we're already established? Yes, we do have to cut the cord in any manipulative or abusive dynamics. But manipulation in itself does not have to be bad. For example, we sometimes have to be manipulative to people who we would open ourselves up to harm if we were to be totally transparent or honest with, right? That's kind of simple, common sense self-preservation. We don't throw ourselves to the wolves. So the manipulation here would be putting on a form of protection or a barrier. We can still relate to people without getting torn to shreds, but we all require relationships and connections where we can also be transparent, be ourselves, and be honoring our own truth and values, and sharing those things with the world in some way, shape, or form. Or else we sell our souls, we self-sacrifice, and we ultimately will probably be led into those breakdowns or explosions as a self-protection, a self-preservation of our own soul. So again, Mars is coming up to a third quarter square to Saturn and Pluto now through the end of, the beginning of November, okay? Square Saturn the 27th October, squares Pluto November 5th. Okay, this can bring up some of these, three-dimensional challenges and tensions, where there can be obstacles put in our path. Again, there's a huge misperceived stereotype about Mercury retrograde that all the so-called astrologers rant and rave about, 30% of every year. Mercury retrograde does not just mean technological breakdown, failure, communication breakdown. It's much more about reflecting upon and discerning our own truth, our own ideas, how we're sharing our own truth and communicating our ideas with others. And it's a time of reflection and changing how we communicate or share our ideas, okay? There's a huge pressure and an energetic pinch with this Mars squaring Saturn and Pluto. It's a transitioning of our own direction and desires, Mars. Okay, this Saturn-Pluto South Node conjunction in Capricorn is the world has demands. We've been experiencing these demands. We've been experiencing this heaviness through the last few months, especially. The world's going through its own death and rebirth at this time. There is a level of, instability out there. And again, we're looking at what's really going on. How can we relate to the world's demands, the world's problems, and the transition the world's going through at this time? Well, this third quarter square between Mars and Pluto really indicates a total reinvention. New moon opposite to Uranus, we are reinventing. And particularly this Mars, again, our direction and desires seek to invent new societal ways of relating and perceiving our world in order to improve upon old standards. The third quarter square is not doing things the same old way, not conforming to societal expectations, lest we break down or self-sacrifice. So absolutely, we're not doing the old paradigm. Now's the time where that old paradigm is going to fall apart. And some of the tension, some of the pressure can actually be coming from that natural falling apart. And if we can be flexible, and that's absolutely the key here. I know it's been redundant, but again, we need to be flexible with this Mars squaring the North Node in Cancer. So to be able to find these new forms that will honor our essence, rather than continue to imprison ourselves in these old patterns. So if the old patterns fall apart, it's not the end of the world. You don't need to carry it all on your shoulders or blame yourself. Maybe even take it with a grain of salt and be open to these changes. What hidden blessings, what openings and new directions may be forming. And with the third quarter square, we don't typically know exactly what those new directions are yet. So seek these changes in an experimental, flexible, open-minded type of way. Okay. We want to be approaching these dynamics like the scientist. What's going to react? Again, that objectivity, the mathematical equation, A plus B equals C. This is information that I can now take that's informing me and can lead me into the different ways that I'm doing things. This third quarter square, again, clearing space for the new, can have an experience of dissolving. That experience of dissolving can be a little bit unnerving. So what's so important, make this the #1 priority, is that we must clear space first before the new can be brought in. And that void can be unnerving. If you find yourself in that void, I'm in between, I feel the pressure, I feel at a loss, things are changing, not sure where going yet, this can actually be good. And here's the focal point, that North Node in Cancer. Give yourself the permission, the space, the flexibility to use the in-between time for emotional processing. We don't have to have it all figured out on the outside. Even the uncomfortable or the depressing, cathartic emotions and releasing that we're going through can inform us and can lead us into standing up for and embodying our true authority. And to be authorities for our connections, for our intimate relationships, for our own deeper values coming from our heart and soul, so we can share that and those dynamics with others and the world. All of this comes out of a death and rebirth process. Scorpio is about celebrating the goodness of what is true and natural that comes out of the death and rebirth process, because what dies is not truly us. It's a temporary phase, it's a season, it's a fashion trend, but it transforms into something realer, truer, more authentic to the core of who we are. Mars is in a quincunx aspect to Neptune these days. It's important that we do not let our dreams, our ideals, or goals exhaust us through this forcefulness that we should prematurely be there now. Rather, there's a huge opportunity in simply exploring and experimenting with how to align our direction and desires with our goals and our dreams. Venus in Scorpio opposite to asteroid Vesta these days. This weekend, the 27th to 28th, requires a balance of processing, actively emotional digesting. Okay, Scorpio is real talk. Scorpio means that conflict is not a bad thing. Conflict may be, I'm being real and I'm addressing what's going on in you. Okay, that may sometimes create friction. Sometimes that may create conflict, which is rather healthy if we wish to be real and authentic people in our relationships. And conflict and tension is actually how we most grow, evolve, and actualize our potential. So no problem with real talk, but this Venus in Scorpio opposite Vesta does say we also need to balance the realness, the emotional intensity, with the space to settle down and let it all digest. Balancing that real talk with our mindfulness and our meditation to recommune with that objectivity that's not overly taking everything personally, but rather sees and understands how these mathematical equations and chemical reactions are in the service to our soul's own evolution. Mercury retrograde all through the rest of October, through most of November. We'll station direct at 11 degrees Scorpio, November 20th, in a grand trine between Neptune and the moon's north node. Again, we are the soul detective, the shadow explorer. We're getting to the bottom of the barrel of the human psyche, magic, psychic nature, transformation. All goes hand in hand. We're exploring collective themes, the contemporary human psyche, contemporary human experience, and the necessary, ever so refreshing, cleansing and emotionally purifying, purging and mourning that may be associated and a part of this cleansing out, of this clearing space. And yes, it is a potential healthy temporary depression that is a symptom of this natural reboot or reprioritization that is taking place from the inside out. Okay, so even negative, intense emotion catharsis can be leading us into what really matters. Okay, Mercury retrograde is real talk. So with Scorpio, there's something to be said about burning bridges or shit talking or carrying grudges or judging others. And then there is something to be said about the good grace of heaven that is known as being painfully real. And isn't it interesting to know how being painfully real hurts, but then releases, like a build-up of intensity and then a breaking down and a release. Whereas being painfully fake hurts, but then never releases, like carrying a ball and chain everywhere we go. And so I wish you all the best in your real talk, your emotional processing, your reinventing, pushing on boundaries, and rediscovery of yourself. I'm going to continue to do my own boundary pushing and groundbreaking. And if you're interested in more of that, I recommend you join my Patreon community, which is a little bit more of a closed circuit container where I'm sharing with like minds. And I feel a little bit more permissible to experiment and share more of the bottom of the barrel dynamics with that group. And I've got some, some extra goodies coming up on the menu. We're going to have a live chat room where you can actually program your own chart and transits all through the chat room. So we got some fun stuff going on there as well. And I'll quickly share, if you're interested in some emotional catharsis, if you're into Scorpio, like the bottom of the barrel, love Halloween time, and if you're into haunted houses or pushing on those limits, I recommend seeing the film Joker. Excellent shadow work material, really brings up some of the bottom of the barrel themes of our current life and society. And that film very much reflects the archetype of evil, how we relate to it, and it's getting more into understanding what's really at the roots of this human phenomenon. And that archetype is being reflected in the astrology, with an asteroid Lucifer stationing on the moon's north node in the sign of Cancer as well. So again, exciting days, wishing you the best. Happy new moon in Scorpio opposite to Uranus. Boom, reset, recalibrate, reinvent yourself. And I look forward to all of the soul detective discovering of those jewels, of those treasures buried very deeply beneath the surface. So again, wishing you the best in these endeavors, and take care.